When you think of ancient Egypt, numerous images of pyramids, mummies, hieroglyphs, the Nile River, and lavish cat statues come to mind. However, these are merely a fraction of what is associated with a fantastical and unique period in Egyptian history. In this video, explore the most extraordinary aspects of ancient Egyptian civilization that are a little less known. Training baboons to catch criminals. While you have likely heard about the ancient Egyptians' reverence for cats, did you know that they also held baboons in high regard? These primates were regarded as true animal constables. It seems that the Egyptian authorities kept baboons on leashes and released them when necessary to apprehend criminals. Among the classic hieroglyphs and works of art, such as the fragment entitled Ancient Kingdom, 5th Dynasty, around 2300 BCE, there are depictions of baboons restraining thieves and other wrongdoers by biting them or gripping their legs. These animals were not only trained to assist the police, they were also taught to gather fruits, brew beer, and dance. They were so venerated in Egyptian culture that tattoos depicting baboons were found on the bodies of some mummies. Sacrificing and mummifying crocodiles. While archaeologists discovered mummified human remains in Egypt, they also unearthed the remains of crocodiles. However, the preservation methods for crocodile mummies were not always the same as those used for human mummies. For instance, in 2019, during excavations at the untouched tomb in Kubet el-Hawa necropolis on the western bank of the Nile River, 10 reptiles were discovered. These crocodile mummies were preserved without the use of resin, which is crucial in the mummification process. Nevertheless, the finding of well-preserved mummified crocodiles is not uncommon for researchers. It is believed that ancient people used these animals as sacred offerings, offering them as a form of sustenance for the inhabitants of the afterlife, or for the reincarnation of specific deities. Crocodiles in particular were associated with the god of water and the flooding of the Nile. Using moldy bread for wound healing. The ancient Egyptians were resourceful and ingenious in many ways. Their method of wound healing with moldy bread may seem peculiar. However, it was in fact effective and served as a precursor to penicillin and other antibiotics used today. This method worked because the mold on the bread typically contained a fungus that produced certain chemicals that killed or inhibited bacteria around the wound. The practice of healing wounds with moldy bread proved to be successful, even though it might sound unconventional. Today, due to all the additives in bread to enhance it, this method would instead harm your wound instead of healing it. Unusual oral hygiene methods. The ancient Egyptians did not overlook the matter of fresh breath. For oral hygiene, they sterilized a combination of ash from bull hooves, eggshell powder, and pumice. They would grind bull horns, burn eggshells to create ash, and then apply this powder to their teeth and gums to protect their oral health. This method was considered fairly effective in terms of mechanical cleaning, although it caused significant gum bleeding at times. Egyptians also used a mixture of pepper, iris flowers, and stone resin for teeth cleaning. It's noteworthy that these individuals were among the first to invent toothbrushes, or as they were called back then, chewing sticks. These tools were made from branches, with one end used as a toothpick and the other end as a toothbrush. Additionally, this civilization developed their own version of mint lozenges, made from boiled herbs and spices such as frankincense or cinnamon, mixed with honey, which could be chewed or sucked. Using canopic jars for storing vital organs. The use of canopic jars for storage of vital organs is well known. Canopic jars were vessels used to store and preserve the internal organs of a deceased person during mummification. Each jar housed a specific organ: the lungs in the first, the liver in the second, the intestines in the third, and the stomach in the fourth. The heart, as the seat of the person's soul, was left inside the body. Initially, these containers were plain and unadorned, but over time, they became more elaborate and eventually represented 4 deities known as the 4 sons of Horus. Happy, with the head of a baboon, held the lungs. Duamutef, with the head of a jackal, safeguarded the stomach. Imseti, with the human head, protected the liver. And Kibi Senuef, with the head of a falcon, watched over the intestines. Shaving eyebrows after a cat's death. It is apparent that the ancient Egyptians held profound love for these animals. Notably, they believed that cats brought good fortune to those who owned them, and therefore treated them with great reverence. When a cat passed away, all family members would shave their eyebrows to mourn its death, continuing to grieve until their eyebrows grew back. Bathing in sour milk. As for bathing, ancient Egyptians, particularly Cleopatra, would bathe in sour milk, usually donkey milk, to enhance their appearance and the condition of their skin. Today we know that sour milk contains lactic acid, a natural alpha-hydroxy acid. Such acids exfoliate the surface of the skin, allowing new, more evenly pigmented skin cells to form and take their place. It is said that Cleopatra required 7,000 donkeys to ensure an ample supply of milk, but she certainly did not let it go to waste. Female pharaohs wearing large beards. A fascinating example of defiance of gender norms in ancient Egypt is the case of Hatshepsut, who was a female pharaoh during the 18th dynasty. The only issue was that she was a woman, and female pharaohs, of whom there were only 3, were not as esteemed as their male counterparts. However, Hatshepsut took matters into her own hands and donned a long beard in the ancient Egyptian style to present herself in a more masculine manner. Some artistic depictions frequently include this false beard. Bone amulets. The ancient Egyptians would tie small pouches containing rodent bones around the necks of infants and young children. It seems that people believed that these bones had healing properties for children's ailments. For instance, it is said that to cure a sick infant, the mother would consume a mouse, and then the bones of that mouse would be placed in a small linen pouch, tied with 7 knots, and hung around the child's neck as a talisman. There's also a hypothesis that individuals from lower social strata employed a similar method to treat children with nocturnal enuresis. The longest reign of a pharaoh. If this legend is true, King Pepi II holds the record for the longest reign in ancient Egypt, spanning 9 decades. He ascended the throne at the tender age of 6 and lived until his mid or late 90s. He ruled Egypt during the 6th dynasty. However, many modern Egyptologists dispute this claim and believe that Pepi II's reign lasted approximately 64 years. If this is the case, Pepi II would be the second longest reigning pharaoh after Ramses the Great, who ruled for over 66 years during the 19th dynasty. Advanced tattoo culture. Tattooing was a highly developed art form in ancient Egypt. While tattoos are now commonplace, the culture of tattooing in ancient Egypt is often overlooked. Archaeologists have not only discovered tattooed mummies dating back to the 11th dynasty, but also depictions of living women with tattoos in the form of dots and swirls on their lower breasts, abdomen, and thighs. Many historians believe that these markings were associated with prayers for protection and blessings during pregnancy. It is thought that only women of high status had tattoos. Over time, tattoo designs became more intricate and often resembled depictions of deities. This was done as a tribute to the gods or goddesses. The tattooing process itself was significant and considered a ritual. It began with the creation of a flat brush for applying the tattoo. The brush was made from an odd number of needles, usually consisting of 3, 7, or 9 needles. After the tattoo brush was created, it would be dipped into charcoal, soot, or indigo powder and then repeatedly pierced into the skin. Soot and indigo possess antiseptic properties, which help prevent infection. Once the tattoo work was completed, it would be rubbed with various herbs and oils to aid healing and fix the pigments. Bread and beer as currency. As we previously mentioned regarding the baboons' beer making, it shows that the ancient Egyptians had a great fondness for this beverage. They used it along with bread as a form of currency between traders. Beer and bread played a central role in offerings to gods and deceased ancestors. In fact, it is believed that soldiers and approximately 10,000 workers involved in pyramid construction were paid in beer and bread. Egyptians believed that if the Nile flood failed and crops could not produce enough beer or bread for the masses, it was a sign of displeasure from the gods. Covering the hair of the pharaoh. The covering of a pharaoh's hair was considered sacred, and their hair should never be seen. Rulers always wore a crown or headgear, called the nemes. This distinctive fashion statement distinguished pharaohs from ordinary people, who were not allowed to wear head coverings. Another intriguing practice was wearing sandals with depictions of their enemies' faces. King Tut, for example, deliberately wore sandals with the faces of his enemies painted on the soles, allowing him to tread upon them as he walked. At least 80 pairs of shoes have been found in his tomb, with one pair depicting an African captive on the inner sole of one shoe and an Asian captive on the other. These individuals represented the kingdom's enemies. Weird hieroglyphs. The creation of hieroglyphs without vowels is well known. Although hieroglyphs consisted of around 2,000 signs, they only contained consonants. There were no vowels, so we will never know how the ancient Egyptians pronounced their words in ancient times. However, according to some sources, there were occasional equivalents of the letter E in hieroglyphs. Additionally, hieroglyphs are considered one of the oldest writing systems in human history. Sacred scarab beetles. The ancient Egyptians considered scarab beetles sacred. In the present day, the family of scarab beetles includes over 30,000 species of beetles found worldwide. They are often referred to as scarabs or dung beetles. Ancient Egyptians believed that scarabs possessed powerful regenerative abilities. It was believed that the small beetle mimicked the journey of the sun, much like how the sun travels across the sky, radiating light and warmth. The scarab would roll its dung ball with eggs from east to west until the embryos matured and emerged into the world. The symbol of these insects can be seen in art and jewelry. The scarab is also associated with the gods Khepri, the god of the rising sun, Atum, the god of the setting sun, and Ra, the god embodying the sun. Giraffe tails used for crafting. Making fly whisks from giraffe tails is a rather straightforward example. Ancient Egyptians made fly whisks from giraffe tails. These fly whisks were not only functional, but also considered highly fashionable. The functionality of these fly whisks is quite logical, since many other animals, including giraffes, use their tails to keep insects away from their bodies. Keeping unusual domestic animals. We have already mentioned that ancient Egyptians loved cats and baboons, but it seems they also kept other animals as pets, including hawks, ibises, which are long-legged wading birds, lions, gazelles, and monkeys. Alongside cats, they also had domesticated dogs, which remain common pets to this day. Although in ancient times, dogs were seen more as assistants in hunting and guarding, in modern times, people still utilize dogs for these very purposes. The burial of pharaohs with their servants. In the early days of ancient Egypt, the bodies of the pharaoh servants were buried with their deceased leader. However, over time, pharaohs were buried with hundreds of miniature models of their servants. These figurines, called ushabtis, were placed with the pharaoh in the afterlife to fulfill any work the pharaoh did not want to do. The figurines also appeared mummified, which is logical since they too were meant to journey to the afterlife. The models served various purposes, such as tiny soldiers, farmers, cooks, brewers, fishermen, and boatmen, and they were discovered with corresponding tools in their hands, necessary for their specific tasks. Each tomb had a magical spell written inside to activate the enchanted figurines. Specifically, it was spell number 6 from the Book of the Dead, which stated, if the deceased is called to do any work that has to be done in the realm of the dead, for plowing the fields, for flooding the banks, for conveying sand from east to west, let him do it. Tears of Isis flooded the Nile. Ancient Egyptians believed that the Nile River flooded every year due to the tears shed by the goddess Isis over the death of her husband Osiris. It was believed that she wept as a sign of mourning and in an attempt to reunite his body. During the flood season, Egyptians celebrated the Night of the Tear by sailing on colorful boats along the river, singing praises to their gods, and offering gifts to the river. This festival is still celebrated to this day, but is more of a tribute to the past Egyptian culture as a whole. Using loincloths for self-defense. Some historians believe that in ancient Egypt, the population, especially men, used loincloths as a way to prevent the spread of diseases during intimate encounters. Hieroglyphs also depict men wearing thin fabric to protect the lower parts of their bodies from the sun and tropical diseases during battles, as well as to ward off evil spirits. It is also believed that they dyed the fabrics in various colors to make them more attractive and enticing. This practice is also seen as a form of worship to the god of reproduction and fertility. The prevalence of incestuous relationships. Cases of incest were also prevalent in ancient Egypt. Cleopatra is a notable example. It is said that her parents were brother and sister, and she herself married both of her brothers at different times. Although no children resulted from these marriages, it was often done to maintain a pure lineage. If you look at the genealogy of the pharaohs, you will find numerous marriages between siblings, and even between parents and children. However, it should be noted that today we understood that such practices often lead to serious genetic abnormalities. For example, King Tutankhamun had a congenital leg defect that affected his mobility and speech due to extensive inbreeding in royal families. This tradition continued until the last native Egyptian pharaohs came to power. Servants covered in honey. Pepi II was known for being particularly demanding as a ruler. Perhaps this was due to his early ascent to the throne. Regardless of the reason, he clearly felt himself to be highly privileged. He had a strong aversion to flies and required his servants to be covered in honey. This helped distract the insects from him. Pepi II was known for other unusual actions as well. Once, he asked Harhu, the chief of Swenet and the leader of an expedition to Nubia, to capture a pygmy and bring him to the court to dance for the ruler. However, it's worth noting that Pepi II's disdain for flies did not reflect the attitudes of other Egyptians towards these insects. On the contrary, thanks to their agility and unwavering persistence, flies were highly respected and even awarded. Golden flies were given to soldiers who displayed exceptional bravery on the battlefield. Wrapping mummies with kilometers of linen cloth. The invention of mummification is attributed not to the ancient Egyptians, but to the people of ancient Peru. It is believed that they practiced mummification 2,000 years before the first mummified person in Egypt. The Egyptians aimed to preserve the body of the deceased for use in the afterlife. The process itself was quite complex, and each step had to be precise and meticulous. One of these steps involved wrapping the body in linen cloth, with lengths of over 1.5 kilometers. It is important to note that not everyone in ancient Egypt had the opportunity to become a mummy and journey into the afterlife. It was a privilege reserved for the wealthy members of society. After the body was dried and wrapped in linen, it was placed in a sarcophagus made of stone, often adorned with carvings or inscriptions. Special items, such as canopic jars, figurines, and mummified animals, were placed inside. Thank you for watching. Please leave your thoughts down in the comment section below.